Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the SCREE March 2023 meeting. This is the Special Committee for Racial Equity for Community Board 8, and we're pleased to have a few guests tonight. I want to welcome our committee members first and foremost, Bob Bender, Julie Reyes, Camelia Tepelis, and I think that concludes the members of this special committee. And then we also have three guests with us tonight. So Julie and Ed, could you mind introducing yourselves? And then Catherine, could you then follow?
Sure. My name is Julie Wertheimer-Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior research analyst at the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. And so I work with Ed, who's my supervisor, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Use he, him. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Research, Evaluation, and Training at the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, and want to thank you very much for having us this evening.
Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Mickey-Took and I am a licensed social worker and I'm currently employed by Kingsbridge Heights Community Center within our Changing Futures program. We provide long-term therapeutic services to individuals affected by trauma in our community.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to Ed Green. He is the chair of the Public Safety Committee, a part of Community Board 8, and he's here tonight. So Ed, thank you so much for being here, helping us shape the agenda and welcoming your committee members to join us as well. Is there anyone that you wanted to recognize?
Just thank you. And I was hoping to have the 50th precinct here. We did invite them. I don't see them yet. And if they don't show up, hopefully I'll have something to bring back to them noteworthy.
Okay, wonderful. Well, with that being said, Julie, should we get started? Let me make sure that you can share screen. I might have to make you a co-host or a host.
Yeah, let me see. I have this. Oh, no, I have the share screen button, but it won't let me share.
Okay, co-host. Okay, go ahead. Or do you see it now?
What?
Do you have access to it now?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay, give me just 1 second to get my show presenter. Okay. Can everybody see the screen? Can I share it properly?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having Ed and I here to come speak today. So I'm going to present on two reports that I've put together looking at racial and gender disparities in domestic violence victimization rates across New York City neighborhoods. And so for today, I'll be focusing on with a particular emphasis on the Bronx and on Community District 8. And if there's time, I'll talk about a few of the bordering community districts, just to sort of give you a picture of your district and sort of the surrounding area. But I want to start off right away by just acknowledging some of the underlying root causes of domestic violence, which stem from a culture of oppression and privilege. And the racial and gender disparities in the data that I'm going to talk about today are largely a function of these historic inequities and structural oppressions, including systemic racism and sexism and the interaction of all the isms that disproportionately impact women and people of color. So it's necessary to keep this social context of the data in mind because usual measures of domestic violence risk factors don't consider the historic inequities in access to resources, gender-based attitudes about power and control, and a history of policies that deny resources to people of color. And so notably, the data used to measure violence in this report and in other similar reports really only captures the existence of violence, not its root causes. And so as I go through the presentation, I just want to keep in mind that truly understanding and eliminating domestic violence in the city will require identifying and responding to these root causes. And I also want to acknowledge, as I talk through this data, particularly in light of these structural forms of structural oppression, that some of these disparities might be upsetting to hear about. And so I encourage you to do whatever it is that you need to do to take care of yourself through this presentation. And if you need to step away for a minute at any point, feel free to do that. And then lastly, I want to acknowledge that sometimes when talking about patterns and trends in data, it can feel a bit like researchers, and like myself included, that we're only talking about statistics and numbers and data points, and not acknowledging that every one of those data points reflects a real person, right? Who's absolutely more than just their status as a domestic violence victim. So I just think that context is important to keep in mind as we move through all the data talk that I'm about to start doing. So the domestic violence data that we used came from the New York City Police Department's domestic violence related felony assault DIR forms, or domestic violence incident reports, aggregated from 2020 and 2021. So a DIR is a New York State form that the NYPD complete every time they respond to a domestic violence incident, regardless of whether an arrest is made. If there's a domestic violence incident occurring that an officer has been called to or shows up at, they're supposed to fill out one of these forms. And the DIR form includes the date and location of the incident, the relationship between the suspect and the victim, and as well as some demographics about both the victim and the suspect. For the population data, we drew it from the Census Bureau's 2020 American Community Survey public use microdata sample. And this data, again, provides demographic data for the population of New York City, as well as all of the individual community districts. So ultimately, we used both the NYPD's DIR data and the New York City Census data to calculate domestic violence victimization rates, which measure the extent to which a specific population is at risk of becoming the victim of a specific type of crime. So the victimization rates are estimated by dividing the number of incidents, the number of victimizations that occur during a specific period, by the population at risk for those victimizations. And then we multiplied that rate by 10,000 just to make the number a little bit more attainable or accessible. And so every victimization rate that we show is the number out of 10,000. So for example, a rate of 25 would indicate a population in which 25 out of 10,000 individuals are likely to experience a domestic violence incident. And we calculated rates this way because it allows for comparison over time and between population subgroups. And so importantly, the data reflected in this report are based solely on incidents reported to and by the NYPD. And national studies indicate that only about half of domestic violence victims or half of domestic violence incidents are reported to law enforcement. And there's a whole host of reasons why people may not report domestic violence to law enforcement, including fear or mistrust of law enforcement, a fear of getting the offender involved in the criminal justice system, concerns over losing custody of children, believing that the offense is not that big of a deal or too personal, and then other intersectionality concerns related to race, gender, class, things like that might make it might influence the survivor's choice to seek or to avoid seeking help from the police and from domestic violence related services. And so these intersectionality concerns may influence the survivor's choice to avoid seeking help from the police and domestic violence related services. And of course, this has implications for the way that the rates present themselves in the data. So women and people of color, and particularly women of color, often experience elevated risks of domestic violence, and particularly intimate partner violence, and increased barriers to accessing the services that they need to escape a domestic violence situation. So for instance, African-American women are more likely than any women of any other racial group to be murdered by their intimate partners, and they're simultaneously less likely to receive necessary domestic violence related services. And so a researcher named Bernadine Wallard, who did a lot of her research actually at our Brooklyn Family Justice Centers, came up with this theory of help-seeking behavior to explain why women of color might struggle to access needed services. And this theory holds that the survivors' socio-cultural context, their lived experiences and beliefs about available services and support, and their personal strength and power all interact to influence the kind and level of services that women seek and successfully access. So turning to the way that we define domestic violence in the report and just more generally in the city, New York City and the NYPD define domestic violence as including two types of violence: intimate partner violence and other family violence. So I'm going to start with the intimate partner violence data and then discuss the family violence data afterwards. So intimate partner violence, or IPV, is violence that occurs between individuals who are currently or formerly married, dating, a boyfriend, girlfriend in a relationship, who have a child in common, or are divorced. I think I didn't say that. So turning to the data, this graph shows the rates of IPV felony assault across New York City, broken down by race and gender. So you can see sort of in the farthest right-hand corner over here that New York City has an overall victimization rate of 15.8, meaning that about 16 out of 10,000 New York City residents on average are at risk of IPV felony assault victimization. And you'll also notice that the victimization rate is highest for Black women, and it's actually nearly 3 times higher than the overall risk for the average New York City resident. We then compared the actual number of IPV felony assault incidents broken down by race to the number of incidents that would be expected if the data reflected the actual New York City population. So the blue bars in this graph indicate the actual number of IPV felony assault incidents for each population, and the gray bars indicate the number of incidents expected if the data reflected the New York City population demographics. So as you can see, a disproportionately high number of IPV felony assault victims were Black. And in fact, Black residents account for 22% of the New York City population, but 46% of IPV felony assault victims. When you break the victimization rates down by borough, you can see that the IPV felony assault rate is highest in the Bronx of all the boroughs, and that rate, 28.2, is nearly twice as high as the overall rate in New York City. Looking specifically at the Bronx rate broken down by race and gender, the pattern is pretty much the same as in New York City more generally. The victimization rate, again, is highest for Black women in the Bronx. And then when we looked at the actual versus the expected proportion of victims by race, again, in the Bronx, you see that, as in New York City more generally, that a disproportionately high rate of victims are Black. And so this proportion sort of is that Black residents account for 28% of the Bronx population, but 44% of IPV felony assault victims. So if we break the Bronx data down even further and look at the rates in the Bronx community districts, you'll see that Bronx districts 3 and 6 have the highest rate. And Bronx 8, so this is good news, actually has the lowest victimization rate in the Bronx. So that's some positive news tonight. But then the rates go up when you look at your neighboring districts or your bordering districts, which are 7 and 12. So I'm going to break down specifically just District 8, and then also I'll show you 7 and 12 just so you can get a sense of what kind of the area looks like in terms of victimization rates. So even though Bronx 8, District 8, has the lowest IPV felony assault rate in the Bronx, you can still see some of these same disparities that appear elsewhere in the city. So of note, Hispanic women have the highest victimization rate in your district, though the rate for Black women is just a little bit lower. They're sort of essentially the same. It's 20 and 21 incidents per 10,000. And both Black and Hispanic residents are overrepresented as felony assault victims compared to the demographic breakdown of Bronx District 8. Looking at Bronx District 7, again, Black women have the highest victimization rate in that district. And the rate is again higher than we would expect given the demographics of District 7. And the pattern is a bit different in District 12. Hispanic women, again, have the highest victimization rate, and Black women have the second highest rate, but that disparity between them is quite a bit larger than it is in your district. So they were pretty close to each other in Bronx District 8, and it's sort of more of a gap between like the highest rate and the second highest rate in District 12. And in fact, in District 12, the proportion of Black victims is actually slightly lower, or about equal to what would be expected based on the demographics of the district. But the proportion of Hispanic victims is higher than would be expected. So the pattern is pretty clear, or pretty stable sort of across New York City for intimate partner violence data. But because New York City breaks apart domestic violence to include IPV as well as family violence, because we think that there are different kinds of violence that have different patterns and different responses and treatments and things like that. And so you'll see that the pattern for family violence is actually a little bit different than the pattern for intimate partner violence. So family violence includes violence between individuals who are related by marriage or blood, such as parents or children, siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, cousins, and in-laws. So looking at family violence, New York City has an overall family violence felony assault victimization rate of 7.6 incidents, or about 8 incidents per 10,000 residents. And the reported victimization rate in New York City is highest for American Indian and Alaska Native men, sort of closely followed by Black women. So again, the two are pretty much the same victimization rate for the two populations. Looking at the racial disparities in the actual versus expected number of incidents, Black, Hispanic, and American Indian, Alaska Native residents were overrepresented among the reported incidents of family violence felony assault. So for instance, Black residents make up about 22% of the New York population, but 47% of the victims of family violence felony assault. Again, the Bronx has the highest rate of family violence victimization of any borough, but this rate is much lower than the IPV victimization rate in the Bronx, which was 28 victims. 28 victims per 10,000 residents, but again, still higher than the other boroughs in New York City more generally. Looking more closely at the distribution of family violence felony assault victims in the Bronx, again, Native American and Alaska Native men have a much higher victimization rate than any other racial, ethnic, and gender community in the Bronx. It's almost twice the victimization rate of Black women, who reported the second highest rate in the Bronx. And some of this disparity can be explained because of small sample sizes, just because there aren't that many incidents of felony assault against American Indian, Alaska Native men. And then there just isn't a huge proportion of that population in the Bronx sort of to begin with. And so that can make these victimization rates sort of appear maybe a little bit higher than they might otherwise be with a larger population. But I still think it's worth exploring and acknowledging this disparity, because it means that even though the American Indian, Alaska Native community is smaller than the other racial and ethnic groups in the Bronx, this community, and particularly male American Indian, Alaska Native residents, are experiencing a proportionately really high rate of victimization. So even though there's not a lot of them, you know, sort of way more than expected in the smaller community, is at a much higher risk. And again, looking at the actual versus expected proportions, again, the Black residents are overrepresented among felony assault family violence victims. They make up 29% of the Bronx population, but 43% of felony assault family violence victims. And so you can see what I was referring to a bit with the small sample sizes on the far right. Right over here, I don't think I have a little circle. The overall number of American Indian, Alaska Native victims is pretty close to what we would expect given the demographics of the Bronx. But our analysis, so the overall number is not that high, sort of comparatively, but in our analysis, it shows that a significantly higher than expected number of those victims are male. So even though the sort of size and the proportions aren't huge, there is a disparity, particularly when you look at American Indian, Alaska Native men in the Bronx, or men and boys, I should say, because family violence can include children too. So looking at the overall rates of family violence, felony assault in the Bronx community districts, again, 3 and 6 have the highest rate, followed by 12, District 12. And then your other neighbor, District 7, is a little bit lower. And then again, Bronx Community District 8 has the lowest, the lowest victimization rate in the borough. So again, that's, you know, really good news for you. But even though the victimization rate is the lowest in the Bronx in District 8, it's still worth examining, you know, who specifically is at a particularly high risk of victimization in your district. And so as you can see, in your community, Asian and Pacific Islander women and girls reported family violence at a higher rate than any other population of District 8 residents, followed by Hispanic women and girls. And in contrast to a lot of the patterns we've looked at so far, Black women actually reported a pretty low victimization rate compared to other populations in your community. And then you see this pattern reflected in our disparities. So Asian, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic residents are overrepresented compared to what we would expect given the demographic breakdowns of this district. And the number of Black victims more closely actually equals sort of the number that we would expect given the proportion of Black residents in your community. Looking at your neighbors in District 7, you'll see that the pattern is again different from some of the other patterns we've seen. So I want to point out that this, the rate for American Indian, Alaska Native women is sort of super high on this graph. But I do want to point out that oh, maybe it actually isn't in this district. Yeah, okay, it's not in this district. There is one district where the rate is really high, but it's because there's only like one incident of it. So in this district, yeah, the rate of American Indian, Alaska Native women are reporting experiencing a just sort of comparatively really high rate of felony assault, family violence felony assault, followed by Black women and girls. And okay, moving on to the next graph. So looking for any sort of unexpected racial and ethnic disparities, you can see that the Black and American Indian, Alaska Native residents were overrepresented, while Hispanic residents were underrepresented. And then finally, this is the graph that I was thinking of in Community District 12. Again, you get this really high rate of American Indian, Alaska Native women showing up in this analysis, but this is this data point is only 1 out of 219 incidents of domestic violence, so it's 0.05% of the family violence victimizations that occurred in District 12, and so that sort of is skewing the proportion and making it sort of seem somewhat inflated. And as you can see on this graph, the number of female American Indian, Alaska Native victims equaled the expected number. But again, the number of Black residents in District 12 reporting family violence victimization is a lot higher than what we'd expect given the demographics of this area. So that was a lot of numbers and graphs, but what does it actually mean? So ultimately, these reports show that intimate partner violence and family violence victimizations show different patterns and therefore require different solutions. So looking specifically at intimate partner violence in the city and in the Bronx, Black residents, and particularly Black women, are overrepresented disproportionately among felony assault victims. So I really only talked about the Bronx and a couple of districts in the Bronx, but really in all 5 boroughs and in nearly all 59 community districts, Black women experienced higher victimization rates than any other population of residents. And Black residents and Black women in particular experience significantly more incidents of IPV felony assault than would be expected based on the demographic breakdown of each borough and each neighborhood. And so ultimately what this suggests is that outreach and efforts to increase access to and use of domestic violence related services we think should target the Black community across New York City and not just in areas where Black residents constitute the majority demographic. So that was sort of why I showed that even though Bronx District 8 has such low, comparatively low rates of intimate partner violence and family violence victimizations, there's still disparities even sort of among those lower numbers. And so it's worth trying to find the communities and the populations in your community that are most at risk and targeting services towards them. And then in contrast, sort of who is most at risk of family violence varies between the boroughs and even within the neighborhoods. So the pattern is a lot less sort of consistent across all of the city when you're looking at family violence compared to intimate partner violence. So American Indian and Alaska Native residents experienced high victimization rates and made up a disproportionate share of victims in the Bronx. But Asian Pacific Islander and Hispanic residents made up a disproportionate share of victims in Bronx 8. And so this sort of differing pattern suggests that efforts to provide targeted services to specific populations across the city should consider the unique needs of each neighborhood to ensure the services are reaching the populations most in need. So instead of just sort of casting a broad or painting with a broad brush, really look at the individual areas and the individual communities and see who needs help and target your services towards them, because the sort of chances are that within the city, different communities are showing different risk rates and therefore require different levels of service and different kinds of targeted service depending on the community that you're in. And so then I just want to show this slide one more time to again highlight that the results from these analyses generally reflect the realities of structural oppression, which privilege certain identity groups and discriminate against others, leaving them more vulnerable to harm. So a real reversal of the trends and the disparities that I talked about is going to require identification of and response to the root causes of intimate partner violence, including all of these isms. And so part of that is going to involve, getting out there with the community, talking with the community, connecting with the community to inform culturally specific strategic efforts to respond to each neighborhood's unique needs. And then finally, I just want to talk about some of the things that NGBV is doing to try to reduce some of these structural barriers and make it easier for underserved and marginalized communities to reach the services that we are providing for them, or that we're at least offering for them. And so NGBV has created a number of different programs and services designed to help lower these barriers and make domestic violence services available to anybody who needs them. And I'm actually going to turn this slide over to my supervisor, Ed, to talk about some of the things that our office and our agency is doing to help get services to survivors.
Thank you so much, Julie. And so one of the biggest service provisions our office oversees is the Family Justice Center. So there's one in each borough. There's one in the Bronx, right up near the courthouse, down the block from Yankee Stadium. And it's a one-stop location where you can get services from city agencies, community-based organizations that we have given free space to assist clients who are suffering from domestic and family violence. And one of the services we instituted over the last year was working with T-Mobile, having the ability to give a survivor who needs a phone, a free cell phone that comes with in most cases free, in some cases a $10 a month fee of unlimited data usage, unlimited text, unlimited call minutes, so they can remain in contact with their safety support groups and their family if need be, or with their employer if it's that. So basically they're getting basically free phone service and a free phone with internet access for their use. In addition, the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence took over the Alternative to Shelter program from HRA, the Human Resources Administration. That program under HRA provided individuals with a security pendant that they could press if they were in their home and felt like they needed to have the police come. That program under HRA required the survivor to have engaged the criminal justice system, have an order of protection against their person who's causing harm. And so the number of people who wanted to interact with that program was relatively small, a couple hundred people a year. We took over that program and did away with the requirements for a order of protection or any kind of contact with the police. And if you're a survivor of domestic and gender-based violence and you want to stay in your home and not go to either a homeless shelter or a domestic violence shelter, you're eligible to get the pendants. And then within the first year of the program, we already have over 700 people in the program. The program is totally free, and we work with community-based organizations in each borough to identify clients and get clients into the program. In addition, in the last, the last 6 months, we also started as part of Home Plus, a free locksmith service. If you wanted if you're a domestic and gender-based violence survivor and you needed locks changed in your home, or you needed a window repaired because it was broken, a door replaced, security bars put on your windows, that service can be provided free of charge through Home Plus. Basically, you get in touch with the community-based service provider. They reach out to our locksmith vendor, and within 24 hours, they'll replace the lock. Occasionally, it takes a little longer if a door is involved, because sometimes I have to order the door. But basically, within 24 hours, the client is getting that service. Another program that we have started is, many survivors have told us, like, I don't want to leave my partner. Yes, he or she is abusing me, but I have no interest in leaving that person. I have connections to them. And so we've started a program where we work with people who are causing harm and want help to understand what's going on in their relationship. They actually cannot be involved in the criminal justice system. So these are people outside who have not had involvement with the criminal justice system yet, but realize their issue in their relationship, and they can get free services. Jump in here, Julie, if I get this wrong. I think it's about a 30-week program that they can get involved in. And longer if they need be. They can get connected to longer counseling services if need be. Also, all free of charge in the community. And lastly, to deal with kind of cyber stalking and things like that, we've partnered with Norton LifeLock, who has partnered in turn with Cornell Tech, who's has a big campus here in New York City, and they have a program at each Family Justice Center where our counselors can refer clients to their program, and they'll do a free diagnostic check of their phone or other electronic device to make sure there's no malware or tracking software that the client was not aware of, and help them remove and document that malware was on their device. And if they choose to, they can use that documentation if they wanted to in some sort of criminal case. They do not have to do that. We're happy to just take the malware off, explain to them what was going on, and give them free Norton software to try and prevent that from happening again. And the last thing I'll note, it's not on the slide. As Julie mentioned, the data kind of points to the fact that, things vary quite a bit across community districts and neighborhoods. And while this presentation talked about felony assault, one of the other projects that I oversee are doing reviews of all the domestic violence homicides that occur in New York City. And you noticed here, districts 3 and 6 in the Bronx have very high rates of felony assault. They also have the highest rate of domestic violence homicides in the city. And a project I just started a couple months ago is really going out into the community, talking so far with organizations, medical centers, things like that, trying to kind of build relationships in the community. And then our next phase will be actually reaching out to residents and starting to solicit information from them about their perceptions of domestic violence in their community, why they think it's occurring, where would they think of reaching out for help if they were going to do that. And then once, building that relationship with them about getting that information, then really working with them to figure out what in that community needs to be done to lower the rate of DV homicides. And, we're doing that because we realize, yes, systemic racism and oppression, play big roles. But if you look at the demographics of Bronx Community Districts 3 and 6, there are other community districts that have very similar demographics that do not have those very high homicide rates. So it would appear that something unique beyond all the other factors that we know exist that might be going on in that community. And we have to figure that out in order to get the right services there.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear. And, I guess in Community Board 8, we've had the inverse where our crime statistics, when they go up, that are, some kind of, violent physical act, assault, rape, battery, etc., most of the time are linked to domestic violence. It could be intimate partner violence, I don't know that we have that layer of detail. But that's, sort of like what drove, us to reach out to you and want to make this connection, because that, we do have the ability to take a look and see that when there's that kind of violence that takes place in our district, it's linked to that. And so how can we address it? How can we work with public safety? And then, certainly cultural aspects and working within the community. A few months back, a police officer was killed by her partner. I'm not sure which district she lived in, but it just, drove home all of the conversations that we have about public safety linked to domestic violence, and how often it just sort of gets glossed over and it's violence, it's this, it's that, rather than looking at the specific harms that we can do something about. And so Catherine from KHCC wanted to share a bit with us about the work that's done there on the preventative side, as well as the long-term treatment and services, therapies that's provided to the community free of service. Before we transition to Catherine, does anyone have any specific questions for Julie and Ed, or we can certainly weave them into the ongoing conversation? Three. Camelia, Bob, and Ed, in that order, please.
Hello, and thank you very much, Margaret, for bringing in the speakers, and thank you so much to the speakers for bringing us this information. Kindly share with us this presentation. We have this report that we are working on every year, and I would love to make a little synthesis of this data and like edit if possible. If you would be so kind, my question would be, could you comment a little bit, how does all this information and data that you're collecting, is it being fed into the law enforcement system? Is kind of the police in each precinct being made aware of these specifics, and do they have a further link with the social services organizations that people could be connected to? You see what I'm saying? So this is so valuable, that information that you're collecting, and I bet it kind of shows also evolution in time and along with the demographics. So I'm kind of interested a little bit more to know how then it's the flow, if there is a flow to PD and to the social services organizations in each district. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak too much on behalf of NYPD, but I will tell you what I know. So this is their data that we built this report around. This report, by the way, is on our website, so we can send you the link that you can actually access the report. But the NYPD does put together weekly a domestic violence report by precinct, and they can see, for example, I know it was mentioned, what a high percentage DV makes of overall crime. So in their weekly reports that are precinct based, so not community board based, but precinct based, it shows across the city, about 45% of felony assaults are domestic violence related. Almost 50% of felony rapes are domestic violence related. So they're well aware of the information they have. And my understanding is that they have monthly meetings in the precincts about the level of domestic violence that is occurring, and in more detail than we have, down to like what street and address location it is occurring at, so they can develop plans to kind of address it. About sharing that information with neighborhood resources, if I have your question correct, there is a program that has Safe Horizon representatives, caseworkers in each precinct across the city. There's 2 of them. One of them specializes in domestic violence, and I think that's the strongest link. Although feel free, anyone on here to correct me for your specific community. That's the strongest kind of direct link the police department has to an actual DV counselor. I will say, however, at our family justice centers, we also have plainclothes domestic violence officers and detectives that are stationed full-time at our family justice centers that a domestic and gender-based violence survivor can meet with at any time. Either they can speak to them about what's going on, or they can file right there without going to the police station. They can file police reports and get help filling out petitions for orders of protection. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. First of all, thank you for this presentation. The information is really quite important and quite stunning. And so thank you very much. I've learned a great deal just in the last half hour. I have two questions. The first one is, you point out that the group that is most at risk is African-American women. I'm wondering whether you have made some determination of why the figures are that much higher for that demographic than for others. Do you know the cause, not just the figure, but the reason why it is highest in that particular group?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit. The data that we have doesn't give, causation. We don't have, at least from this report, we can't really make any claims about, why the rates are so high. But the research in general shows that all of the sort of systemic barriers to accessing services, to sort of promoting like health and growth in communities, it all kind of disproportionately impacts Black women of color and Black women in particular. And all of those, factors sort of compile on each other and compound on each other in a way that just makes that particular population, especially at risk. And they're also sort of in a unique position where they're also, they're sort of more at risk of the underlying factors that cause violence. And they're also less likely, this population is also less likely to reach out to the police or try to access services for a number of reasons. There's a lot of reports by Black women that they're concerned that if they go to the police, or even if they go to services, social services and things like that, that they won't be taken seriously, or they won't be treated the same as white people or people of other races who are going and for the same reasons. And so a lot of it is sort of systemic and cyclical. And so really a lot of the ways to reduce the impact of domestic violence on Black women is to really sort of get at those systemic factors, and then also find ways to get our services to that community so that they feel, for whatever the barriers are that are stopping them from going to the police or going to the services, that we can remove those barriers and make them more able to access help.
I mean, this is not a clinical response by any stretch, but certainly Black women die 9 times more likely than white women in New York City, I believe, or is it in the United States? And that's also because women of color are listened to less when they're expressing what their concerns are and things like that. So that will be our next presentation. We need a qualified expert to come in and speak to some of those issues, but I'm glad you asked that, Bob. Ed?
I've just,
Sure.
thank you, Margaret. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I do have one other question, which is, it's always been my understanding that there is a very strong link between domestic violence and the homeless situation, homeless shelters. That very often, because women are victims of domestic violence, that's the primary reason that they tend to wind up in shelters for women and families. I know it's hard to separate, maybe even impossible to separate poverty and violence because they are closely linked, but is that accurate, that domestic violence is perhaps the leading reason that women tend to end up in shelters?
No, I don't have the most recent statistic available to me, but a couple of years ago, about a third of the women who are entering homeless shelters reported that the primary reason they were entering a homeless shelter was domestic violence. And I should say, if they go to a homeless shelter, they will be screened. You know, there are dedicated shelters for domestic violence survivors in New York City. So if they do go to a homeless shelter, they will be screened at the homeless shelter for domestic. If and they say they are, they'll be screened, and they will attempt to. They can't always do to space issues, but they will try to transfer that family or that survivor to a domestic violence shelter.
Okay, thank you once again.
Thank you. Ed?
Yes, if I may, I have two questions myself. So Ed mentioned pendants and kind of like a life alert thing, and it was it's kind of shocking to hear that once you remove the criteria for I guess it would be the police contact or the order of protection, it jumped from 200 to 700. And I'm suspecting that's gonna, once the word gets out, that's gonna numbers even gonna increase. So, but maybe can you be a little more specific about how this process works once the pendants are activated by the person seeking help? I mean, who receives the information? Who responds to it, and what typically happens when whoever responds shows up? I don't know. Can you elaborate on that a little further?
I can walk through the process up to what typically happens when someone shows up. I think I would probably want to follow up with you after I talk to our contracted provider. But basically, once the individual activates the pendant, it goes to a call center where people are trained to communicate with domestic violence survivors, and they will ask if the pendant was triggered by accident, right? Very often it is triggered by accident. If it's not triggered by accident, they will ask what response they would like. The unique mechanism in this new program is under the old program, if you hit the button, you said you needed help, the only response that you were going to get was the police department. Now the survivor can designate, hey, I hit the button, I say I need help. You know what? I want you to call my mother and tell my mother I'm having an issue, or I want you to call my brother, or you can say, hey, I want you to call the police and I want the police to come. I think the last time I looked at the numbers, about 80% of the people still, the primary thing they want is the police to come when the button is activated and the call center determines it's a true activation and you need assistance. The call center will automatically have the police dispatched to your residence. 20% of the clients, they want someone else notified, and so that person would be notified, and there's a pre-existing understanding between the person notified and the survivor what they want that non-law enforcement person to do. I am not as well versed about what actually happens when the police show up on the scene, to be honest with you. So I think I would I'll go ask the actual individuals that oversee the program, and I can get back to you if that's okay.
Thank you. I just have one other question. So as chair of the Public Safety Committee, we obviously, our committee has a lot of direct communication with the 50th Precinct and the NYPD. So is there anything that you feel the NYP can do that they're not already doing to address the issue of domestic violence? I mean, I know there's a lot of complexities to it, but from being the chair of public safety, dealing directly with law enforcement, what do you guys suggest? Can the NYPD do anything they're not doing better?
I'm kind of the lead researcher in the office and not the policy person or the commissioner. From where I sit, honestly, I have a great working relationship with the police department. They openly share data, and I know they invite us to DomStats. They have a weekly meeting where they bring in a police precinct and talk to them about their DV that's going on in their precinct. And people from our office is invited there, and we were able to give input about what is going on. So yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I'd be happy to go back to my office and see if there's something that they would like to say about the 50th precinct. Generally, I don't deal with the 50th precinct, but I do deal with, the domestic violence unit at 1PP, and every time we ask them for assistance or one of our clients need help, they're there to help them.
Thanks a lot. And any information that you could pass on to help us with this issue would be helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, and public safety does have its own meetings, like Ed mentioned. So if there is someone from your policy team, or Ed, if another colleague that you want to refer, that we could loop into future meetings, either through SCREE or through public safety, we'd welcome it.
Yep.
So now we have two areas where we need additional experts. So thank you very much. Catherine, thank you so much for being patient. We'd love to hear your perspective on the work that you do at Kingsbridge, and what else goes on to support the community in being culturally specific, and other areas where your program wants to grow.
Absolutely. So I definitely appreciated Julian at the presentation. I definitely connected greatly to it. As someone who directly works with survivors, I can say that I connected to a lot of points, especially specifically talking about like, why aren't people reporting? You mentioned mistrust, and I was taking a lot of notes. So I wanted to just share a little bit about Changing Futures program and kind of what our model is and how we navigate the needs of our community. So our main service that we provide is long-term therapy. So we do provide group therapy and individual therapy, but we realize as we're consistently like assessing the needs of our clients and our community, there's so much more to treating trauma, whether it be domestic violence, sexual violence, other traumas. That's really more about just that treatment approach. So a lot of our work also includes prevention and education, like Margaret mentioned. So we go to colleges and schools and high schools, elementary, middle schools in our community. We hold groups, we hold parenting groups. Some individuals who attend the groups are mandated by ACS, some come on their own accord. We also hold support groups. So one specific support group is titled Beyond Trauma, and it's an education-based group. So people don't have to identify themselves as victims of intimate partner violence or family violence, but it's really around learning and education around the topic. And we often find that people do then kind of make that realization when they're provided the education around what a healthy relationship is. We also provide a lot of referrals and case management. So when someone comes in contact with us, we can make an assessment, determine maybe if there's needs outside of what we can provide. So we're constantly assessing other providers in our community who may meet that person's needs in addition to what we can provide. We also hold community outreach events. Again, not with the purpose of saying, hey, you have a problem, come find us, but just making a safe space for community members to come and to meet us and learn about us. So if in the event that a need comes up, that we're present. I think that what I would say is we work a lot with children, and a lot of our assessment is that, as you would acknowledge, that when therapy is for the child, it's important to involve the whole family. So we maintain contact with family or caregiver. We have family sessions, and it's a lot of skill development too for the parent is a big part of the process. And then I also just wanted to touch on kind of some of the unique skills of our therapists. So again, all of our therapists are trained to navigate trauma, as I mentioned, child sexual abuse, domestic violence. It's a lot of heavy topics that come up, and they're skilled in a variety of different approaches. So obviously talk therapy, everyone is familiar with, everyone is aware of, I'm sure, but we try to go beyond that. So all of our therapists are trained in trauma-focused CBT, eye movement desensitization, reprocessing, and trauma-informed art therapy. These are kind of best practices in the world of trauma. But we also always seek out specialized training to really meet our clients where they're at. Play therapy, sports-based therapy, animal assisted therapy. So that's basically who we are, and kind of what we're about. And I will share that, kind of connecting to the data that was mentioned. I kind of looked a little bit at our statistics for 2022. And I connected to what Margaret had mentioned in the sense of like, we aren't necessarily connecting data and separating intimate partner violence and family violence. So as a whole, about a third of our participants identified IPV/family violence as their presenting problem. And again, I would say that that number is probably a little bit higher in the sense that sometimes people come to us and don't realize it is IPV or family violence. They may say this is what's happening and don't kind of label it as that. About 68% of our participants identified themselves as Latinx, and 28% of them identified themselves as Black, and then 77% identified themselves as women. So that's that. And thank you for letting me share all of that.
Thank you. Could you just talk a little bit about, I guess with the preventative work in terms of building healthy relationships, and I guess the other side of that coin is helping people identify when it is intimate partner violence, or if it is domestic violence, and helping people understand like that doesn't have to be the norm, and how I guess you all work in terms of prevention and then just helping people wherever they are.
Sure. So it starts small and is built upon, right? So if it's a group that we're holding, we don't start and automatically say, this is who you are and this is occurring. We provide information and allow the community to also share their experiences. So a lot of these conversations are peer-based. So in some of these groups, individuals will share their experience and kind of build off the experience of each other. We talk a lot about consent with the younger folks. So in high schools and college, you really talk a lot about consent and what that means, about, talking about in a relationship. What does consent mean? The fact that consent is given at point A, but could be taken at point B or C. Again, with the younger folks, social media comes up a lot in these conversations and kind of dispelling myths. Social media is great. It connects a lot of people, but it also puts relationships and body image and all of these kind of topics that teens and young adults are experiencing. It really kind of like highlights. So we try to dispel myths and again, open up conversations. When it comes to meeting people where they're at, we really try to take formal and informal assessments of what people identify their needs are or identify what their concerns are, and also to just identify their opinions. So in some of these groups, we will ask general questions versus saying, we need to talk about this. We'll say, okay, what's the general consensus? Sometimes what we'll do is we'll have, if it's a larger group, we'll say, go to this side if you feel this is right, or go to this side if it feels wrong. Maybe like, if I'm in a relationship, it's okay for my partner to raise their voice at me. And then so, people will kind of be in the middle and they'll open conversation. And then sometimes we will bring statistics and number into the conversation, but really people don't often want to hear that. They don't want to say, oh, well, 75% of people feel this way. They're really focused on like their unique experience. But when it comes to group, again, it's a lot of peer sharing and information. I'll also say that when it comes to education and conversation, it really requires some kind of unique roundabout ways sometimes. So I'd mentioned art and kind of animal assisted and sports-based therapy. Some of these methods are kind of a roundabout way to get people to express their emotion and feeling, and allowing someone to express that. And if there's a negative emotion or feeling coming up and they're not sure the cause of it or where that's coming from, we can build on that conversation, allow them to, to talk more and to kind of better understand, so that they can really understand, what is this coming from? Someone may feel that motivation to maybe leave a relationship, but there's so many resources or so many connections that they have to kind of just a lot. There's a lot going on in their minds as to what what to do next. But yeah, prevention and education, I will say, is like one of the most important things, is that it starts early. So if it is college age students that we're talking about intimate partner violence, it's probably too late. This is a conversation that starts with our children, which sounds kind of unfortunate that we have to have these types of conversations. Even around sexual abuse, it's conversations that start early, understanding, I don't want to say right or wrong, because it's such a black and white statement, and the topics that we discuss aren't black and white. A lot are very gray, but really do open these conversations with children, with teens and their parents, so that these conversations can have at home. And also, so if there are concerns with a child or a teen, that they know who a safe person is to speak with, that they can express their concerns, so that their needs are met and they're not going home to an unsafe place.
I should have disclosed this. I work at Kingsbridge. But the last thing, if there's any sort of like high level lessons learned or things that you learned about the community from KHCC is a rape crisis center. And so through the appropriations awarded last year, we received funding that we basically were a pass-through organization to survivors of domestic violence, specifically for housing. And if they were displaced, needed clothes on their back, needed a down payment for their, to move into a new apartment. High level, is there anything that you learned from that process about the community or this dynamic that you didn't know previously? Or sort of what might be some takeaways that you found to be interesting?
I mean, what I will say is that I've worked in other community-based settings previously, and what led me to this program specifically is that kind of wraparound approach, and the kind of idea that there are constantly changing programs in addition to programs that meet the needs. So specifically, what have I learned is that there are still individuals who are not coming forward to express their needs or seeking services, but those who are, I think, are very much so appreciative of the support at whatever level it may be. And I think that I have learned, I think, most from our survivors specifically, and the stories that they share and the experiences that they bring to us and our team. Their unique situation, their unique stories. That's I think my biggest takeaway overall.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Catherine. Any questions for Catherine, I should say? Okay. Well, thank you to all of our presenters. Any other questions, comments? Please, I welcome them. Barring none, we appreciate all of your presenters. It's a late night. We appreciate it for you coming to share this information with our community so that we can learn from it, and hopefully make informed decisions and influence policy wherever we are in our lives. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for spending your night with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Okay, so just to conclude our conversation tonight, Ed, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for helping us design what we want to talk about tonight. And certainly we remain open to having additional conversations with NYPD or with the Public Safety Committee. So thank you.
Great. I'd like to say, I'm going to have to sign off in a few minutes, but thank you for inviting me, and our meeting with them previously was great. And I just kind of an open invitation. If anything comes up with this, if you want to present more about this, we can talk about having it at the Public Safety Committee, especially with some still kind of unanswered questions about what happens in some of these situations. If you get some of that information, please pass it on, because I'd like to have a discussion with the 50th precinct and whoever they have assigned specifically for domestic violence about some of these issues and how it corresponds with some of the information we've been given tonight. But so thanks again for the invite. It's been real.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, great. So before I forget, can we have four committee members? Yes, is that right? Yeah. Can we just take a quick vote on the minutes, the previous minutes from January, February, November and February? Is that right? Yeah.
Margaret, I think it was November and January because we canceled last month, but I make the motion to approve them both.
We canceled in February?
Did we have one? I should have asked you the question because I think several of us said we didn't do it. And then I was actually looking right now
Oh.
through my emails, and I think it
We
was
have quorum.
January the last we had it. So
Yeah, we didn't have one in February.
remember, because
have quorum.
several people
Yeah.
canceled, and I also canceled last minute. So
Yeah,
Right, none in February.
yes, January and November.
correct. So I made the motion for both.
Thank you.
I
Second,
second,
thank
Second,
you, Julie.
second.
Great, and certainly we'd love experts who could come and present on some of these open items, not open items, but just speaking to sort of the barriers to services that women of color encounter. Would love for recommendations if anyone has any connections to someone who studies in this field and could bring some data for us. And Camelia, I will follow up and get the slides because they were generous enough to customize their presentation for our community board, as you know. So definitely I'll get those slides so that we can add them to our report.
that would be very valuable, Margaret. I mean, I thought that information was fascinating. I was glad to see that Community Board 8 has the lowest numbers in the community boards in the Bronx, but still any of this domestic violence is bad, regardless of what the numbers are. But there was so much information in that presentation that it really would be valuable to have it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was through a question of Community Board 8 inquiring perhaps with DHS, Department of Homeless Services, to your point earlier of DV being the #1 reason for homelessness in our district. Now, I don't have that recorded. I don't have the data or the response from DHS myself. But that is something that I understood the community board to have received. So if you have it, that would be super helpful. And then, it is something that perhaps we could ask the 5-0 in their monthly, I should have asked this when Ed was here, but I'll follow up with him. If they could be specific about the DV data that they're also getting on a monthly basis.
Yeah, well, Ed seemed to be open to working with us, and I think that would be great to, to get the 50th precinct to start giving us information on that subject. As you know, they break down in robberies and assaults and auto thefts and so on. It would be good to get this information included in the monthly breakdown as well.
Yeah, because they do mention it in passing that, if there's an instance of rape or something like that they do attribute it to DV, but I don't know that it's spelled out in the report. So I think, that would be important, whether it's that kind of violence or, any other felony assault, to have it explicitly stated. Okay. All right, so I will try and reach out to my network, but I would love if you all could do so as well. Camelia, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, just a suggestion, Margaret. I mean, what I started doing in ENS is add how to say, like, important presentations when we have a speaker bringing like good information. Adding them to the minutes, but also putting them on the committee website. So actually, because
Yeah.
this presentation tonight was very substantive, I would really love this information to be available both to the community and to the board. So if you would maybe just ask whomever is your person in the office to add it as you know, as a resource under the committee website section.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, we'll do. Lastly, a small thing, for the April meeting, I will be here leading it, but for the May meeting, which I know is kind of when we're supposed to be wrapping up our report and things like that, I will be traveling that week. So I wanted to talk with you all and see what you'd like to do. If perhaps our vice chair, is that the right word for Julie's position? Julie, if you want to lead it, or if we wanted to postpone our meeting in May and just focus on June, but then, you know, use next month's meeting. Maybe we have a presentation in April, and then use next month's meeting to just get our report lined up. What do you all think?
Well,
I
Margaret,
would-
would you be open to rescheduling the May meeting to a time that doesn't conflict with your travel?
Sure. I just know it's tricky, but I'll try. I can try and ask the office if there's a date available.
Yeah, it's not, you know, it's not unusual to do that. Sometimes, you know, for one reason or another, a committee meeting does have to move to a date other than the date when they usually meet. So, you know, and if there's an open date in May that fits with your travel schedule, then, you know, it might be possible to move the date.
And if you don't find a convenient date, I would say let's see what happens at the next month's meeting to see if in fact a meeting is necessary, or if we work on the reports. I say let's see what happens next month. Either way, we'll support whatever your decision that you make. But I would say let's see what happens next month, because we still have to work on the reports in any event.
Okay. So let me do that. Let me check and see. So my next steps are to get the slides from Julie at the mayor's office to end domestic violence, gender-based violence. Post the presentation with our minutes and on the community board website. An expert on some of the conversations we had about women, and especially Black women's access to services, perhaps as it relates to DV or to services in general within the community. What other next steps did I miss? I feel like we just talked about a few and I missed one. Interim report. I have to check in with the other chairs on you know, to update the ongoing work that they do that's related to SCREE or to advancing racial equity within the district on their respective committees.
Well, in particular, Margaret, because we're going through the budget priorities right now, this is a good time to remind the other committee chairs about equity issues in determining their budget priorities. So, I mean, that can be done at the board meeting when you give your report on this meeting.
Okay. Okay.
And Margaret, I know you just listed a slew of things to do. Feel free to email me and give me an assignment or two if you like, if you feel too overwhelmed with anything.
Okay. Will do. Okay. Anything else? I think that's it.
No, it was a good meeting. Good speakers. Thanks for putting it together.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Can I-
Camelia, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so just, I mean, Bob just said what I kind of the main point I wanted to add, which was on in relation to the budget requests. And I know David Gilman is asking us to submit before sort of end of April. So I kind of was just wondering if you feel like there would be enough time to add the requests to update that great chart that you did for remember for the report, but if not, but I think it's just one set of data. You see what I mean? An extra row basically.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, it's a significant endeavor. So I was just asking if you think you would have the time. Also to flag that I support Bob's suggestion if the date in May could be moved around your schedule. I think that's perfectly fine. And not that I'm at all essential to this committee, but I will also travel the last week of May. And then also another issue which I feel needs to be addressed. I raised it in, I don't know, several now meetings in relation to the recruitments that are ongoing in our office. And I will not name names or put figures, but I will say that I feel like our community board should be a little more careful in assessing and offering equal terms for the same job to irrespectively of gender, irrespectively of ethnic background, which now we are in a situation which we are not. And of course, this could be objective factors, but I do feel like it came up and personally, I feel uncomfortable. So I kind of just wanted to put it out there, even in internal conversation that happen, for this issue to be considered. And we
Is
have
this
another
related to staffing?
position.
Or
Yes,
to
to recruitment.
to member recruitment?
No, actually, I mean, in this case, it came up in relation to staffing and job offer and particularly remuneration, which just today there was yet another news piece how in city agencies a discrepancy between male, female is still present, no question about it. And we also have an issue of, again, assessing Caucasian versus Latino, Hispanic, or male versus women for the exact same job. Again, all of this from public data. Then we have another recruitment in course for the district manager position. So just again, putting it out there, we should be mindful and be an example. And then the other thing is what you just said. Sorry,
before you move on, can you send me the data? I mean, I think that would be really interesting to have
yeah.
a presentation.
And there were
this
several
page.
meetings, Margaret, actually that you were not on, so I didn't want to, you know what I mean? So I just put it in
Alright.
generic term. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, okay. And then the other thing that you just mentioned, also, I kind of wanted to ask, if you remember, we at some point we did have a kind of a conversation about a resolution to be put forward where we were comparing demographics data versus the demo of the district versus the demographic data of community board members. And we ended up putting that in the report. I do wonder whether it makes sense to potentially still put it forward as a resolution at some point before the end of the year, because with the updated numbers obviously for 2022, because those discrepancies seem to be quite persistent in the last 3 years. You see, so yeah, even though last time I was the one of those that said, oh, you know, let's be let's not like appear to be asking, you know, the electeds, you know, respective borough president or council to sort of appoint a particular, underrepresented group or whatever. But these numbers how to say, because the discrepancies persist, I do feel there is scope there to put something forward. We are in the process of recruiting right now, right? Like the community boards. I believe the deadline was actually extended to March 7. It was March 7, I
15.
think, and they 15
Oh,
exactly. They
Yeah,
extended.
yeah.
So then the next couple of months, the BP office and the council members' offices will be assessing applicants, right? So actually, I believe it's quite timely. So I'm just like opening it up for suggestions, right? Like the resolution was basically written, the numbers are there, everybody can see. These are again numbers from public data. The discrepancies persist, particularly in the underrepresentation of our Hispanic community, which is 49%. But by the way, African American plus Hispanic end up being around 60%. Of our overall population. So I think, again, this issue could be a little bit, advocated from us. And I do believe this committee is the one to advocate. If that's through a resolution, it's a recommendation, or however you want to put it. But again, I do feel that like we all in this committee know more than the full body of the community board members, and we should be the ones kind of pointing it out. Sorry, I'm done with this. I mean, thank you.
Thank you. I know I updated the 2021 numbers. I didn't really even look at the numbers. I was just like, I know I have to enter
I
this.
can do it. I can do it for next time, just for this page. I'm looking at it right now.
I'll
You're
look-
correct. You're 21. Yeah.
Yeah, so I updated it, but let me go back and look, and then we can talk about it next month. But I don't remember what the 2021 numbers were. And then I assume the 2022 numbers should be up soon. So I can check in with the BP's office on when they anticipate, unless it's up already.
Margaret, can I just say a couple of things about what Camelia just said? With regard to the board office, and we have 2/3 of the membership of the district manager search committee at this meeting tonight, which is Julie and myself. We are going to black out the names of the applicants. That's going to be done in the board office before we even see the applications and the resumes. So we're not going to know the gender or the ethnicity of the applicants. We're mindful of the situation, and we're doing everything possible to make sure that it's going to be both gender and ethnicity neutral. With regard to community boards are never going to be accurately representative of the communities they represent. They're always going to skew older than the community as a whole, because the people who serve on community boards tend to be people who have a little more time than, let's say, people who are parents of young children, who, as everybody who's ever been a parent of a young child knows, have very little time. So it's always going to skew older. It's always going to skew more highly educated. It's always going to skew probably more affluent than the community as a whole. But on the subject of ethnicity, and I say these things saying, these are just built-in structural problems, because who's going to have the time to attend meetings, sometimes twice a week in the evenings, that sort of thing? Who's going to have the freedom to maybe steal away from their job during the day to work on a report or do some research? But in terms of ethnicity, I think we really should be able to strive for a community board that does represent the ethnicity of the district that the community board represents. So, what I'm saying is there are always certain structural problems that we're never going to solve, but there are other problems, particularly with the issue of ethnicity, that can be addressed and should be addressed. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Michelle, thank you for riding with us this whole night and an hour and a half into it. Anything that you want to share about what encouraged you to come tonight, or anything you want to share with us at all?
Yeah, no, it was obviously my first meeting with all of you in this committee, and it was a really interesting presentation. I think, you know, when you talk about disparities like we heard today, it's always just part of a much larger issue, right? Tied to so many things beyond just like the idea of racial equity. It's, you know, poverty and jobs and healthcare and access to many different things. And so it's always a really tough issue, but it's exciting to me that, you know, we're talking about it here. And yeah, so I'm glad to have joined, and it was a really interesting presentation and nice to have met all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for spending your night with us, and we appreciate it. Are you yeah, we'd love to have you back again.
Yeah, I plan to. I moved up to Kingsbridge July 2021 and had some personal life stuff happen for the last year or so. So I'm finally feeling more settled. So I did apply for the community board application and everything. And so I have all of the calendar meetings to attend, whether I'm, you know, a member or not. So super excited to get more involved now that I feel more settled in the neighborhood.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's great to hear. Well, good. I think many of us have hopped around the different committees, and they each have their own spin on it. So definitely Bob is, you know, one of the co-chairs and has probably been on every committee at this point, and maybe Julie too. So, and Camelia and I just keep hopping around to different committees. So it's great to, you know, that's, you know, to each their own. So thank you so much, and fingers crossed that you get advanced to be a part of the community board. It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Okay, barring anything else, I welcome a motion to close the meeting.
I'm making it.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you so much. All right, have a good night. Thank you all.
Thank you, Margaret. It was a great meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
Good
Have a
night, everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Right.
And good luck to you, Michelle.